Let's be honest about this. Do you think, not just the consumer perspective, but the boardrooms, the C-suite, do they have the skills and the knowledge required to deploy AI safely and securely?
Not yet.
Welcome to our Agents of Change series, where we explore the future of business, leadership, and innovation. In today's episode, we're exploring how leaders can unlock the true value from AI. And I'm joined by Ashley Braganza, Professor of Organisational Transformation at Brunel University of London, to discuss how Agentic AI can help do just that. Welcome, Ashley.
Paul, thank you so much for having me on this episode.
Great to have you with us. Now, to kick things off, we've been exploring how UK organisations use AI for some time. Please could you tell us a little bit about the work at Brunel University and your partnership with Salesforce?
So in terms of the things that we're doing at Brunel to start with, Brunel has been working in this area of AI for a number of years. Through our engineering department, we've been working with computing developments for a while. But back in 2018, one of the things I saw was this thing called AI was going to come through and start to have a really significant impact on organizations and how they operated. And so I set up the Center for AI back in 2018, which is an interdisciplinary center. So it brings together people from engineering, computer science, from law and our law school, people from arts, humanities, health and medical school. It's genuinely interdisciplinary to really understand what the impact of AI is going to be. In addition to that, I launched the first non-technical master's program in AI because I spotted that there is a gap actually between the C-suite who want to come up with the strategy for the organization and the implementation through AI, Agentic AI, and the people who understand how the technology works. And so it's really important to have people who are able to bridge that divide.
Thank you, Ashley. Now, AI is not new. The technology itself and the concept of AI has been around since the 1950s. Why now do you think UK executives are under a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver on the promise of AI?
I think companies have come to this area of AI, having already, as you said, adopted over the years some early iterations of what we today call AI. So the use of algorithms, for instance, in organizations is not new. I think where this technology is different is that it has become incredibly democratized. And since the large language models have been released, people in their personal lives have started to understand the power of AI. Organizations and C-suite level executives have realized that what they need to do is almost catch up with where some of the employees are in terms of their use of AI. They have made the investment, or at least they've announced that they're going to kind of get on board. And so the pressure now to deliver on that investment is incredible. And in terms of ROI, to some of the points that you made in your introduction, when you look at any return, there are two parts to it. You can either reduce your costs or you grow your revenue. And I think companies have started by saying, how do we make things more efficient? How do we get our processes to be more efficient? How do we deliver better customer services using these technologies? I think where the real value is, which is where I think the pressure is being innovative, is coming up with something that is genuinely going to differentiate one organization from its competitors. But that innovation and that ability to genuinely differentiate yourself with these technologies takes time. And it's about trying to get not just the C-suite, but then trying to get that innovation through the organization and therefore the changes that then need to follow through on that.
And Ashley, you mentioned there, which is quite interesting, that consumer AI is now available, and that's obviously where before it wasn't accessible. It was probably in the back office in that machine learning capacity with the different algorithms that you mentioned. But because now consumers have direct access to AI and large language models, it's created this swell of excitement and opportunity. But let's be honest about this. Do you think, not just the consumer perspective, but the boardrooms, the C-suite, do they have the skills and the knowledge required to deploy AI safely and securely?
Not yet. Not yet. I think some boards are starting to kind of get to a point where they recognize they need to become AI literate. They need to understand what this technology can and can't do. I think boards have started to recognize that there is a level of hype in what people are promising that this technology can do, and separating out some of that hype from the reality is, I think, part of what the board need to do if they are going to deploy AI responsibly, because otherwise what they're going to end up doing is over-promising and under-delivering. And so I think part of that AI literacy, part of getting the board to recognize and understand what these technologies can do, I think is the first step of the board starting to get on their AI adoption journey. And let me give you a couple of for instances. So we talk about AI being able to improve customer service. I won't mention names, but clearly there are some organizations that have said, well, if the agents, this AI is going to improve our customer service. Tell you what, let's close down the call center. We don't need a customer services team to be able to do this. And so they've got kind of caught up in what I would say is that the hype end of AI, only to discover that actually the technology is phenomenal, what it can do is phenomenal, but it requires the organization to change internally. And just saying what we're going to do is replace headcount with this technology is very short term. They've got to make sure that if they're going to adopt AI responsibly, they've got to understand what it can do, equally understand what it can't do for their business. And just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for them. And then bring this technology in a way that is sensible for their business. So for me, boards are becoming more literate and more able to understand these technologies, but I don't think we're there yet.
So we're not there yet. There's a bit of work still to be done, probably not just at the C-suite and the board, but probably front to back across an enterprise or across an organization to make sure that they're aware of the technology and how it could be used. Now, you mentioned about, I would describe this as the disillusionment of AI. I can replace my contact center, I can reduce human capital, which probably isn't necessarily the right way to be thinking about this opportunity. Obviously, there has been some success out there already. There's been some great companies that have done tremendously well and applied AI and reaped the benefit associated with that. What have you seen out there? What have you seen in the UK? Which what works well from your perspective?
I think what works well is when an organization really understands the processes that they have currently, where the pain points are in those processes, and really stop to think about how they can then use these technologies to make those processes more efficient. I'll give you a couple of examples. Again, in the financial services sector, the ability to understand how risk works. The human brain can do so much in terms of managing risk and managing risk calculations. Let's be honest, AI can take in far more factors and give a much better risk profile than humans can. And so that would be one area. If you look at in the health area around diagnostics, it's another area that's had real success in getting machines to look at scans, look at some of the imagery, and then be able to do some diagnostics to not to replace a physician but to support that physician in taking that decision as to, is this something that needs to be treated, or is it benign? If I look at retail and the way the retail sector is going, you can begin to see how some organizations that have come to AI, whether it's in terms of managing their logistics in the back and managing all of their supply chain, both internally and with their customers, their suppliers in further down in the supply chain. These organizations that have actually adopted AI in some core processes are starting to be able to make a significant difference. So in just about every sector, I think you can begin to see that there's some organizations that are beginning to move ahead in terms of adopting AI, but they're doing it in a very targeted way, Paul, and they're doing it with the C-suite kind of putting their full support behind this adoption, because that adoption means change. And if that change isn't supported and driven from the top, then quite frankly, it's not going to carry through.
Thank you, Ashley. And I think the adoption and change is an interesting one, because I think very good examples across a multitude of different industries. And it's clear that there is opportunity, but it keeps coming back to that strategic alignment throughout the organization that's going to really deliver value. Now, for the examples you've given, there's lots of productivity opportunities. How do you do the diagnostic? How do you do high volume calculations on risk profiles, etc.? Where do you think, just coming to the ROI dilemma, where do you think there are opportunities to go from not just productivity and savings, but actual revenue growth and the opportunity of using AI? Where do you see that in the future?
Sure. So for me, that's about looking at how organizations can genuinely innovate. And part of this is, you look at products and the products and services that organizations have to offer. And what they have done in the past is they've made incremental improvements to the product or service. They've made incremental improvements to the extent to which they can look at delivering customer value, customer satisfaction. I think what these technologies enable organizations to do is really stop and think about, how do we actually change our business model? How do we change our operating model? How do we make some fundamental changes to not just what we do, but how we do it, why we're doing it? I think the big challenge is, are boards up for that level of innovation? Are boards really looking to make a step change in what they do in their marketplace? I think for me, that's where it's at, because it's about adding value. And these technologies, AI, Agentic AI, if you look at robotics that's coming along, agents that move, these allow organizations to genuinely, it's a cliche, reimagine their businesses. Are they up for reimagining their businesses? For me, that's where the revenue benefits are.
I couldn't agree more. And you and I have had numerous conversations around this particular topic. And it's actually, I want to touch on the reimagine your business. Okay. Because I think sometimes talking to customers all day, every day, it's very easy for many of us to kind of focus on the immediate challenges, the things that are in front of us, the things that we've always done, this is the way it's always worked, those types of behaviors and traits. Because we're moving into a new era, and the opportunity of, how is AI going to revolutionize my business? What advice would you give to anybody in any organization, but predominantly in the C-suite? What advice would you give to help them conceptualize the value of AI?
So my starting advice, Paul, would be what they've got to do is stop looking in the past. And to some extent, stop looking at even what they're doing today, because the answers to creating the future, particularly with this different kind of technology that's coming down the line, the answers aren't embedded in the past or even in the present. It does require boards to take a look at what is it that they can deliver going forward that their competitors don't deliver today. Think about what it is they can they can deliver to their customers that their customers don't even know they want today. And so just and that's not easy. Okay. That hurts the brain. Who are those customers that I'm not even serving today? Because in 2 years' time, my customer base it may well be different. In 2 years' time, the regulatory framework may be different. In 2 years' time, my suppliers may now need to be different. We've got to really take a holistic view about what that future is going to be. And there isn't one future because nobody's got a crystal ball. It's then being able to say, can we come up with different scenarios of how this might play out, and then start to think about what we can do as we start edging towards those futures and start thinking about how these technologies can help us to deliver into those futures. That's where I think boards ought to be focused. That's where the C-suite ought to be focused. But in my experience, working with a number of boards, they're looking for answers in the what do we do today? How do our processes operate today? What's our business model today? What's our operating model today? And I think they're looking in the wrong place.
I think, Ashley, that's wonderful, because I do think sometimes, even as somebody who, runs a part of our business, it's easy to solve for the operational challenges that are in front of you each and every day. But you're absolutely right. We need to lift our head above the parapet. We need to think more strategic, especially when we think about this groundbreaking technology. And this technology, because you touched on this at the start, with kind of machine learning algorithms. So there's a series of different technologies in the spectrum of AI now, between, predictive AI, machine learning, generative AI that we've also had, and we've seen with the success of these large language models. But agentic AI, and you touched about in the concept of strategy, when we think of product strategy, business strategy, how do we, what is our operating model of the future? How do you see kind of agentic AI particularly playing a role on business strategy?
I think this for me is a hugely exciting area, because some of my colleagues in strategy will not like what I'm about to say, which is the way we think about business strategy, the way we conceptualize business strategy, the way some organizations even develop their strategies. I think that mode of thinking is past its sell-by date. I think the way in which we need, and the way in which people in the C-suite need to think about strategy itself needs to change. And what do I mean by that, Paul? What I mean is, so here's the traditional way of doing it, right? The C-suite, the board, think about what the strategy is. They bring in lots of voices. They get lots of opinions, lots of data. Some of it's fed from the bottom through, gathering information from members of the organization to kind of make sure everybody's got a voice in terms of developing the strategy. But over a period of time, they develop the strategy. That strategy then gets embedded in a set of PowerPoint slides and then gets communicated. It gets distributed and cascaded down through the organization. That's kind of the traditional way most organizations kind of do strategy.
That feels quite long, like that process itself in this world where technology is changing at such a pace. That feels like it's a little bit too long, no?
Exactly. By the time you've had all that feedback and the board have digested it and then argued amongst themselves, because strategies are not value free. There are values embedded. There's power embedded in the strategy, depending on which part of the strategy gets prioritized and which one doesn't. Right. So you're absolutely right. That process of negotiation takes an awful long time. But let's say they're able to do that and they come up with that strategy. In the past, that strategy would be cascaded down to people, and those people would do the strategy, implement the strategy. There are all sorts of reporting mechanisms for are we on track or not. Where I think agentic AI turns that model of strategy development on its head, and where I think boards need to be really aware and have this on their radar, is a lot of that decision making, that day-to-day, minute-to-minute decision making that in the past would have been done by human beings, is now being done by a set of agents. Individual agents that are going to do very specific things, or super agents that are going to control a whole bunch of other agents, right? And so you can begin to see that whereas in the past, if I take a decision in the university about anything, it's going to, the ripple of that decision is fairly contained. It's not going to make a big splash. It's fairly contained. If I've got a super agent that's processing thousands of transactions or thousands of loan applications in a very short period of time, you can begin to see that those decisions that are being taken down here, particularly if those agents are learning and changing and morphing based on the data that they're getting, then actually over a period of time, and I'm not talking now, doesn't have to be years, but those agents may well, through the decision making, kind of take the organization in a certain direction, whereas the business strategy that the board set is kind of going someplace else. So boards need to really understand that when they start investing in bringing agentic AI or AI agents into the operations of the organization, it is not a fire and forget. It's not we've signed the budget, now the agents will be deployed and we, the C-suite, can now kind of step away. The C-suite really need to understand and have greater levels of transparency for how those agents are actually operating, because those agents are implementing the board strategy, and there needs to be real clear alignment between these two things. So I think that is an area that people in the C-suite really need to think about.
Technology historically has been transactional. It's served a purpose and it's enabled us to transact or do something or execute. The future is collaboration and this opportunity to combine both humans with the level of empathy and the emotional intelligence that we have in the workplace and being able to navigate with technology that we can collaborate directly with now, that can do, high volumes of number crunching, can be very analytical, can kind of zoom in on those pieces of optimization that we may miss, but equally the technology might not have the cultural understanding of the ethics and values that the organization want to achieve. So bringing the two things together will unleash faster time to market, huge scale and huge growth, hopefully, for organizations.
And if I may, what it does, I really like the word ingenuity, because I think what this allows is human ingenuity to really come into its own. If you look at the history over millennia of developments at any level of technology, you look at the history of developments, there has been a human being that's been at the heart of that. And that human ingenuity is something that I don't think AI agents is, and I know that there is this concern that, agents are going to come in or AI is going to come in and completely replace what people do. I think this is an opportunity for human ingenuity to really make that kind of a step change that I was talking about, in order to kind of genuinely get the benefits from revenue and opportunities rather than just cost cutting.
I love that. Thank you, Ashley. That's brilliant. So let's consider executives at the moment, people in leadership roles. How will AI reshape the leadership role? Kind of question number one. Question number two, what key areas for education should those leaders kind of embark on as they think about next year and they think about their own individual role in reshaping the future of work with AI?
Sure. So to answer your first question around, what's the role of a leader? They motivate, they transform, they bring about change, they take decisions, right? Even if you talk about transformative leaders and having the vision, leaders have this vision of where they want to take the organization. I'll come back to decisions. A leader takes a decision that when they've heard that there's something, something either incredibly positive that's happened or a crisis has just hit the organization, that leader is going to take a decision about how they're going to behave. And they make these decisions very often intuitively. They don't necessarily articulate the decision, but that decision has been made in their heads. It's been made in their heart. It's been made in their gut, right? That's how they're going to behave in that particular situation. They see a business case. We need to invest $5 million in this or in that. They're going to have to take a decision. Are we or aren't we going to go forward with this business case? Or are we going to, put this one to one side and go with that business case? These are decisions that leaders need to take. Some of those decisions are now going to be embedded in these technologies. And if as a leader you don't understand which decisions and what those decisions are that are being embedded in those technologies and how those decisions are going to be played out when operationalized at volume, at scale, at speed, then quite frankly, I think you've taken your eye off the ball as a leader. So leaders will continue to do the things they've done. They'll continue to motivate. They'll continue to set the standard for the culture of the organization. They'll continue to bring about change. But one fundamental difference with these technologies is they've really got to understand where some of those key decisions are being taken.
Thank you so much for joining us today. That's all we've got time for, but there is lots to consider, and you've provoked a very meaningful conversation that touches on everything from strategic alignment across the organisation, change and people impact, and how that change presents a unique opportunity, or probably a once in a lifetime, to have agents and humans and people working together to collaborate, to unlock great potential to drive what we're ultimately talking about here is not just the cost takeout and the productivity, but the opportunity to drive growth for businesses, and your guidance of how can we in the UK really seize this opportunity, because we will be the makers, we will be the future leaders, we will unlock the potential, and hopefully we can set direction for the rest of the world working in collaboration. So thank you so much for joining us.
Paul, thank you for the opportunity for being here today.
Thank you. That's it for today. If you liked our discussion, hit like and subscribe for the next episode of our Agents of Change series.